The storm does not ask for your permission. It does not check your schedule or consider whether you are ready or wait for you to feel strong enough to face it. It arrives, and in that arrival, in that sudden and total disruption of every plan you made and every comfort you arranged, you discover something about yourself that no amount of calm weather could ever reveal. You discover what you are actually made of underneath the version of yourself you perform for the world. Most people fall apart in the storm, not because they are weak. Weakness is too simple an explanation and too easy an escape. They fall apart because they were never trained to hold themselves together when everything external stopped cooperating. They built their stability on conditions, on favorable circumstances, on other people behaving predictably, and life unfolding in manageable increments. The moment conditions changed, the structure collapsed, because it was never really their structure. It was borrowed, and borrowed stability returns to its owner the second pressure arrives. What Ayanokoji Kiyotaka possesses is not borrowed. It was forged in conditions most people will never voluntarily enter: in total isolation, in the deliberate removal of comfort, in an environment designed to produce either collapse or something far beyond ordinary resilience. What emerged was not someone who does not feel the storm. What emerged was someone whose internal architecture is so precisely constructed that the storm cannot find a structural weakness to exploit. The wind comes, he registers it, he calculates its direction, its speed, its likely duration, and then he moves with information rather than against panic. That is the distinction that changes everything. Not the absence of feeling, the presence of function inside feeling. You have been watching the wrong people your whole life. If you thought calmness belonged to those who had nothing to worry about, the person with no pressure has no need for calm, they have ease, which is an entirely different thing and requires nothing to maintain. Real calm, the kind that holds when everything around you is accelerating toward chaos, belongs only to the person who has met the storm before and survived it, and more importantly, who has studied that survival closely enough to understand exactly how it happened. They did not simply endure, they watched themselves endure. They became the observer of their own experience in the middle of their own crisis. And that observer's position, that slight but absolute separation between the experience and the self that is processing the experience, is the entire architecture of an unbreakable mind. Most people cannot locate that observer position under pressure. Under pressure, they dissolve into the experience completely. They become the anger. They become the fear. They become the rejection or the failure or the humiliation, wearing it like a second skin that feels impossible to remove. And from inside that experience, fully submerged, they make decisions. They say things. They do things. They react in ways that they will later examine in the calmer air of aftermath and struggle to recognize as themselves, because it was not quite them. It was the storm moving through a body that had no anchor, no interior fixed point, no trained capacity to remain distinct from what was happening to them. The damage is always done in those moments of full submersion. Not by the storm itself, but by the unanchored person the storm moved through. Training your mind to be calm is not a passive process, and it is not a natural gift distributed at birth to a fortunate few. It is a practice. Deliberate, uncomfortable, repetitive, and almost entirely invisible to the people around you while it is happening. It begins not in crisis, but in the ordinary moments that most people sleepwalk through, the moments of mild frustration, small irritation, minor disappointment. These are the training grounds that nobody respects, because nobody thinks they count. You did not get the response you wanted from someone. Your plan shifted unexpectedly. Something you were looking forward to fell through. In those small, ordinary moments of friction, the average person reacts, automatically sighs, complains, tightens, pulls the experience into themselves and lets it color the next hour, or the next conversation, or the next decision. The trained person notices the reaction forming and makes a different choice. Not suppression, not denial, a deliberate pause. Breath that creates enough space between the stimulus and the response to allow a functioning mind rather than an automatic nervous system to determine what happens next. That pause is everything. It sounds too simple to matter, and that is exactly why most people dismiss it before they have ever seriously practiced it. The pause is where your entire relationship with your own reactivity lives. Before the pause, you are a mechanism. Input arrives. Output follows. The process is essentially chemical, essentially animal, essentially beyond your conscious control. After the pause, you are a person making a choice. The quality of your entire life is determined by how consistently you can locate that pause and how skillfully you can use the space inside it. Ayanokoji's legendary composure is not a personality trait he was born with. It is 10,000 practiced pauses, accumulated in silence, that rewired the automatic responses into deliberate ones, until the deliberateness became so habitual, it looked like nature. It was never nature. It was the most demanding kind of work, the work that produces no visible product, receives no external applause, and can only be measured in what does not happen. The reaction that did not occur, the word that was not spoken, the expression that did not cross the face. Proof of discipline is always in the absence. Here's the thing about storms that no one tells you when they hand you advice about staying calm. Calm does not mean comfortable. Calm does not mean the absence of feeling, the switch off of sensation, the numbing of the body's response to threat and pressure. Calm means functional. It means that you continue to think clearly, to perceive accurately, to make decisions from information, rather than from the distorted lens of an overwhelmed nervous system, while the full experience of the storm is present in your body. You can feel the wind and still know which direction to walk. You can register the cold and still maintain your course. You can acknowledge the darkness and still trust the map you memorized before the lights went out. That is what a trained mind does. It does not pretend the storm is not happening. It refuses to let the storm's existence justify the abandonment of function. Storms come in more forms than weather. They come as betrayal, the person you trusted completely revealing themselves to be something other than what you believed. The foundation of a relationship you built your plans around suddenly and completely absent. They come as failure, the effort you poured everything into returning nothing. The strategy you were certain about collapsing under conditions you did not anticipate. The result that should have confirmed your capabilities instead, raising every doubt you had worked so hard to silence. They come as humiliation, public, visible, documented, the kind that seems to define you to everyone watching, and makes the person you have been building feel suddenly flimsy and unconvincing. Every single one of these storms carries the same test underneath the different surfaces. Will you remain yourself while this is happening? Will you continue to function? Will you allow the process to continue operating even when the outcome looks nothing like you planned? The person who can answer yes to those questions consistently, not occasionally, not when the stakes are low, but consistently, under genuine pressure, when the cost of remaining functional is real, and the pull toward reaction is biological, that person has developed something that cannot be taken. Because circumstances can be taken. Results can be reversed. Reputations can be damaged. Relationships can be lost. Everything external is subject to forces outside your control, and therefore subject to loss. But the trained mind that remains calm inside the storm, that capacity was built by you, inside you, through experiences that only you lived, and it belongs to you in a way that nothing external ever can. Nobody can repossess a discipline you developed. Nobody can revoke a standard you set for yourself and kept. That is the only kind of power that is truly yours. People around you will test this without realizing they are testing it. They will bring chaos into your space, not always with malicious intent, sometimes simply because chaos is what they carry, and they have not yet developed the training to contain it. They will be loud when you need quiet. They will escalate when you need resolution. They will react when you are trying to think. And what they are looking for, consciously or not, is the confirmation that their chaos has an effect on you. That their storm becomes your storm. That you are as destabilized as they are. Because if you are, the dynamic makes sense to them. They have company in the disorder. But if you are not, if you remain oriented, functional, unaccelerated by their urgency, that steadiness disorients them in a way they cannot always articulate. They will call it coldness. They will call it not caring. They will call it strange, robotic, inhuman. What they are actually experiencing is the discomfort of being next to someone whose internal weather is completely independent of their own. That independence is threatening precisely because it is so rare. You become that rare person not by withdrawing from people, but by deepening your relationship with yourself. By sitting with your own discomfort long enough to map it, to understand where your particular storms originate, which specific triggers accelerate your pulse and cloud your thinking, which words or silences or looks from which kinds of people reach the deepest and fastest into the places you work hardest to protect. You have to know your own architecture to reinforce it. The person who has never examined their own triggers is permanently at their mercy. They are surprised every time the storm arrives, because they never studied the weather patterns specific to their own interior. Ayanokoji studies everything, including himself, especially himself, because a general who does not know the full capability and the full vulnerability of his own forces has no business commanding a campaign. Start in the small storms, the minor frictions, the daily irritations that feel beneath the level of serious practice. Start there because that is where the practice is actually available, in the ordinary moments that life provides in abundance, where the stakes are low enough that failure costs little, and success builds the neural pathways that will hold when the stakes are not low. Every small pause practiced is a deposit. Every automatic reaction consciously redirected is a deposit. The account builds slowly, invisibly, in a currency that does not show up on any ledger anyone else can read. But when the real storm arrives, the serious one, the one you did not see coming, the one that would have previously dismantled you completely, you will draw on that account, and you will find it larger than you knew. Because discipline compounds the same way everything else does. Quietly, continuously, without announcing itself until the moment it matters. Calmest person in the room is never the person who has the least to lose. It is the person who has built the most to stand on. Internal architecture so solid that the external weather never reaches the foundation. That person is not special by birth. They are forged by choice, the same choice, repeated in unglamorous silence, in the moments no one witnessed and no one applauded, until choosing became nature, and nature became unbreakable. Every storm that ever hit you was also a blueprint, an exact diagram of where your structure needs reinforcing. The places where you broke those are not evidence of permanent weakness. They are the most precise instructions you will ever receive about where to build. Study the cracks. Reinforce them. Return to the next storm, not hoping it will be smaller, but knowing you are larger. That is not optimism. That is strategy. That is the only path that actually leads somewhere. Train your mind, not for the calm days. Anyone can hold themselves together when nothing is pressing. Train it for the storm that is already forming on the horizon, the one you can see coming, and the one you cannot. Train it until calm is not a reaction to good conditions, but a standard that exists independent of all conditions. Until the storm arrives, and you are already standing exactly where you need to be. Oriented, functional, unshakable, not because you were lucky, not because the storm was gentle, Because you were ready. Because you built the kind of mind that the storm cannot break. That is not a fantasy. That is a decision. Make it now, in the quiet, before the weather changes, because the storm does not ask for your permission. And the only question worth answering is whether you will be ready when it arrives.